Welcome, everybody. Welcome, dear viewers. This is Economics Unbound. Thank you for tuning in. It's going to get really hot in here tonight because we're discussing a very hot topic. The topic of the moment, in my view, corruption. Indeed, it is one of the largest challenges facing the presidency of Cyril Ramaphosa. What do you think, Nana?
Welcome, everyone. Tandega, I do agree with the president in his assessment that the economic future of the country needs special attention and a particular focus. As I keep saying, each week we are in perilous territory and we need to do a few things differently to ignite the engine of this economy. This is because it is the state of the economy that determines who has food on the table and who does not, who goes to bed hungry and who does not, who goes to school and who does not.
Yes, Nana, and I would like to talk about a particular type of corruption, and that's called regulatory capture now. Now, regulatory capture is when a commercial entity or a company captures the regulatory agency that is meant to act in the public interest and instead gets it to advance commercial interests or the interests of a special interest group. These commercial or specialized interests are then prioritized at the expense of the public and indeed at the expense of the economy. When a regulatory body is thus captured, there is a net loss to society and to us all, Nana.
Well, Tans, corruption has profound consequences for the average person on the street because it steers public monies which could be used for social and redistribution of wealth programs towards the pockets of a small number of people who in the process conspire with those in fiducial relationships with the voters and boards of state-owned entities.
Well, that happens too, Nana. And tonight we're going to discuss the full gamut of kinds of corruption. We will discuss corruption in all its manifestations and different forms, from petty corruption to grand larceny and to treasonous state capture. Now, we are also going to discuss their different and dire economic consequences. We will attempt to shed some light on these economic costs to the economy.
The 2018 Corruption Perception Index or CPI shows that most countries are failing to fight corruption. The results also show that corruption is contributing to a crisis of democracy around the world. The CPI measures levels of corruption in the public sector in 180 countries around the world. Using a scale of 0 to 100, where 0 is highly corrupt and 100 is very clean. Denmark and New Zealand scored the highest, while South Sudan, Syria and Somalia scored the lowest. Since 2012, only 20 countries improved their scores, while 16 significantly decreased. The majority of the countries have seen little or no progress. The global average score stands at 43 out of 100. The analysis shows a disturbing connection between public sector corruption and a weakening of democratic institutions.
Corruption is present in all countries, rich and poor, north and south, developed and developing. Numbers show the startling scope of the challenge. The World Economic Forum estimates that the cost of corruption is at least $2.6 trillion or 5% of global gross domestic product. And according to the World Bank, businesses and individuals pay more than $1 trillion in bribes each year. Corruption robs schools, hospitals, and others of vitally needed funds. It rots institutions as public officials enrich themselves or turn a blind eye to criminality. It deprives people of their rights, drives away foreign investment, and despoils the environment.
In the last few years, several countries have seen a rise of political candidates running on a populist platform to undermine institutions and push anti-democratic agendas. They often use corruption scandals and public disillusionment to win power.
It is especially important to build up the capacity of national anti-corruption commissions and prosecutorial efforts. Governments can also enhance anti-corruption efforts by ensuring independent judiciaries, a vibrant civil society, freedom of the media, and effective whistleblower protection. The international community can complement these efforts by working more effectively against money laundering, tax evasion, and illicit financial flows that have prived countries of much-needed resources that feed further corruption.
No matter where you are in the world, having strong independent institutions, freedom of the media, and engaged citizens is the most sustainable way to combat corruption.
Well, the UN did put it very succinctly. And to discuss a little further, I am joined on Skype by the Executive Director of Corruption Watch, David Lewis. Welcome, David, to the SABC. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tandeka.
Now, you had a conference on corruption, and one of our leading prosecutors, in fact, our leading prosecutor, was there. What did you get a sense of? Do you get a sense that we are soon going to be seeing a heavy hand on corruption?
You know, she was careful not to promise when we would see the first big prosecution, and she was also careful to explain how significant her challenges are, how badly damaged that institution had been. But I have to say, she has a manner that makes me confident, and I think it did all the others in the room, that this is somebody who's going to do her damn best to tackle corruption. There's no doubt about that. But, you know, as I say, both she and the head of SARS, who is also an impressive person who inspires confidence, were careful to stress how large their challenges were.
Oh, so corruption destroys institutions. And many institutions in our country have recently, particularly in the past 10 years, been severely weakened. Now, how can we get back to a situation where our institutions are strengthened? I know it will take time, but we are sliding in global corruption indices. How can we get back to a position that is acceptable?
That's a big question, and I think, you know, to some extent, you know, depending on the level of detail in which the question needs to be answered, it differs from institution to institution. But I think the one key measure that has to be taken is that the leadership, a leadership has to be put in place that is both competent and honest and has integrity. I mean, arguably, state capture was affected by Zuma's prerogative to make key appointments, and by his influence over other key appointments. And the first thing is that has to be reversed. I mean, you know, that doesn't mean that all the problems are solved, but no problems can be solved until a new leadership is put in place. And I have to say that I think the Ramaphosa administration has done that pretty quickly and pretty impressively. I mean, the two institutions that we have just mentioned are two of the most damaged institutions. The economic consequences, of course, of the damage done to SARS are damn near incalculable. But a decent leadership has been put in place. And then there are a variety of other reforms at the policy level, at the statutory level. But also, you know, there's a second tier of leadership that contains many of the remnants of the old guard. And then there's the problem of severe demoralization in the institutions. So, you know, I think we've all underestimated the institutional damage.
Yes, and we know that, and we know, David, that weakened institutions equal weakened economic performance. And it's incalculable what this phase of ours and previous phases of large-scale state capture and corruption have done to our economic prospects. But the UN says that rising civil society movements in each of the countries are a hope for the future. Do you see yourself and Corruption Watch as part of that rising movement throughout the world to counter and put a stop and an end to corruption?
Yes, I do, actually. I think it's pretty widely accepted in South Africa, certainly, that civil society organizations, the judiciary and the media were largely responsible for dealing with corruption. And, I'm gratified that we were able to play our little part in doing that, as were you guys at the SABC actually able to play your part in doing that. But I think that, one of your lead-in segments said something about the impact of corruption on the democracy. And certainly our key representative institutions of the democracy failed us in this period. And it's vital that they be strengthened. You can't only have under-resourced, unelected bodies that don't command police forces, that don't command armies, being the sole check on corruption. Now, we have a challenge there to improve those institutions.
Now, David, I was listening to Professor Fukuyama earlier in the day, and he says that while the impact may be dire on the economy, the economic impact may be severe, dealing with corruption is essentially a political project. And that often it's not so much that political leaders do not know what good governance looks like or what is right or what is wrong, and that corruption is bad for the economy. It is just that politically, the main elites in society, the powerful vested interests, have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo because they perceive that they can collect larger rents, larger economic benefits from the status quo. How do you deal with such entrenched interests if you're a political leader? Spare a thought for President Cyril Ramaphosa.
Yeah, I spare plenty of thoughts for him. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I think it is about, corruption is about a power dynamic. I will just say that the Fukuyama statement may be right, but it's pretty self-evident. We elect public representatives who appoint public officials precisely in order to ensure that they constrain the worst tendencies of powerful private interests, and that includes the private sector. So yes, this is what we have to reintroduce the new effective regulation, effective policy making. I mean, one of the big impacts of corruption is the effect it has on public trust in political leaders and policymakers. So even the policy process, where now we have an urgent need to start talking about economic policies in this country.
Indeed we do.
It's difficult to have that conversation where nobody trusts the person who is making the policy proposal.
Indeed, David, but that's where we have to leave it for tonight. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
We will be back after this short break. Please stay with us.